Hello to everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. We've been wanting to do this event for a while since Daniel came and spoke last fall, I believe. I think we were able to get some people out to the society's office and we got some good feedback on that event. Really wanted to have an M4 graduating M4 exclusive going into residency, what we need to do for just getting prepared, switching from being a student to being a resident. So that's what we're trying to accomplish tonight. We have a lot of good faces to help us out. I'll let Clint introduce everyone here in a second. I just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you for coming. But I hope you guys enjoy and learn something. Feel free to ask questions. It is being recorded, so you should be able to refer back to this later if you need to. So thanks again. Thank you to all our speakers, and I'm excited to get this started.
All right, as usual, good evening, everybody. Robert has started with a very humble introduction of himself. For those that don't know, I'm Clint Cummins. I'm the CEO of the Memphis Medical Society, and Robert Frederick is affectionately known as the godfather of money in medicine in our organization. So glad to have him here, and I recognize some names on the participant list. I'm glad to have you all here. Before I make some quick speaker introductions, since we have a very unique audience on the Zoom tonight, I want to make a very unique announcement. Many of you, if not all of you, are starting to enter residency, and a lot of times that is the time in your membership with the Memphis Medical Society and TMA and any other organized medicine association that you get involved with. It's hard to stay involved during that time. And so first, I want to tell you that we're always here for you, no matter what that involvement level stays, stops, starts, or continues at. And then secondly, there's actually some legislation at the state level that is going to impact you, state level being the TMA level. There is a resolution at this year's House of Delegates, which is May 22nd, that would clarify the fact that residents are not able to vote in TMA elections. And that has an immediate impact on you if you're entering residency. And so if there are individuals out there who are residents or who know residents and want to encourage them to attend, we are taking a bus of our delegates and potential delegates up there. There's actually an opportunity for residents to be voting delegates at that event as well. So I encourage people who are passionate about how they're represented within TMA to try to make time on Saturday, May 22nd. We will bus you down and bus you back. The bus ride back is full of, we'll call them refreshments on the way back. It's a good bus ride back. You'll have a good time. I assure you of that. And so I wanted to give that quick announcement. If you want more information, you can go to tnmed.org/HOD, and then you can contact Cara or I from our team if you want to ride the bus, and you'll get some specific emails, particularly if you're a resident, that are about this topic. So there'll be more information to come on that. So now for a quick introduction of our speakers, I'll start backwards. We have Jeff McIlvaine with us tonight, who's on the call, and Jeff is a private loan officer, I guess, or private, I should say private relationship manager with First Horizon. Jeff has been around banking and specifically banking for physicians for a long time. I'm not going to age you or date you, Jeff, but it's good to have the level of experience that he has on the call. Jeff and First Horizon and several other folks on that team have been longtime supporters of the Medical Society. We really appreciate their support and are delighted to have them here tonight. And then our first, yes, thanks, Jeff. Jeff's going to touch on some specifics about loans and home purchases in his part of the presentation. And then our first speaker, Daniel Burke with Burke Financial, is going to hit some of the basics of what you need to be looking out for as you enter residency. And I know Daniel has his business partner, Ben Yin, with him tonight. If he wants to give Ben a little extra introduction, I'll let him do that. But Daniel, thanks again for being here. I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to you.
For sure. Thank you so much. And it's good to see some familiar faces from previous discussions. So Yeah, Ben Yin. I'm actually in Nashville, Tennessee, and then Ben's down in Atlanta. And so we have the privilege, kind of two organizations, if you will. I've got Burke Financial Group here locally, and then Ben and I also have Generation Financial Partners that's based out of Atlanta. And we really serve physicians all over the country. So very familiar with talking with medical schools and residency programs and fellowship programs. And then obviously, attending physicians anywhere from a few years out of medical training all the way to, ones that are retired now. So we're very familiar with, kind of the ins and outs and all the different stages that physicians walk through when it comes to, planning and finance. So really what we're going to do today, guys, is I'm going to try as best as I can to force feed you a ton of information. Okay. Now I know you guys can handle it better than anyone else because you guys have been force fed, for the last 4 years, and you're going to be force fed for another 4 years. So here's what I would ask though. I don't expect you to retain all this stuff. Really, if nothing else, I would rather overshare some information and maybe just kind of spark an interest to, oh, I remember that. Or when I'm looking through my benefits at residency, I remember Daniel said something about that. And then you can do self-research. You can reach out to myself or to Ben, if you have additional questions. And two, guys, a lot of this stuff, we really want to be resources in the medical community. And so even if you have quick questions and it doesn't mean, you become clients of ours, we always say, we're happy to do that. If it's questions about an HSA or about an insurance or about a 403B or about anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. So what we're going to do today is I'm really going to try to hit on some things that I think are going to be pertinent to you in residency. I'm not going to get into stuff that, I think maybe is a little bit more for established physicians. But obviously that progression will come over time. So let's first talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls that Ben and I see, as we're consulting with physicians every single day. So the first thing is you guys kind of ignore your finances. All right. And I say this tongue in cheek, but you're so busy. Some of you are married, already maybe starting a family. And so it's very difficult when you say, hey, listen, we had a physician the other day that we were speaking to up in Illinois. Ben and I were, or I'm sorry, Baltimore, Maryland. And he said, guys, I have had training for 30 years. I've been in school for 30 years. I've never had one class on finance. And so it can be daunting to try to figure out, okay, now I'm kind of later in my life. And now I'm trying to figure out, what a lot of people have had training on since they were in their early 20s. So number one, ignore your finances. Number two, you don't participate in some of the benefits that your residency has to offer. Okay. Now we're big believers in taking advantage of a lot of the free stuff that they give you, free insurances, other benefits, but also understand it is a balance between not having all of your benefits through work or through residency and also having some on a personal side. That way, when you do eventually leave residency, you can maintain that coverage as you go, what we consider portability. Something else we talk about is, taxes. Right now, Ben can tell you, probably gets tired of me talking about taxes every day, but taxes are at the forefront of virtually every planning conversation we're having. And the reason being is, we're coming off, well, we're currently in historically low taxes right now. And we're coming into this new Biden administration where it's 100% clear now that tax rates are going up. Okay. Now, to what extent that's still unfolding. But for you as residents, if you're making $60,000, $65,000, $70,000 a year, you're going to be hopefully in the lowest tax bracket you'll ever be in. So how can we take advantage of that over the next 3 to 5 years? And then that way, when we do move into a higher income bracket, we've positioned some money out of the tax system. Okay. You get all your advice from blogs and other, radio pundits and television shows. And guys, I'll be the first to tell you, I listen to podcasts almost daily. So it's great places to digest some information. But also understand that everyone's got an agenda. Everyone's trying to sell something. And so you need to make sure that you're gathering information from multiple sources and then kind of weigh it against what your, ultimate investment objectives are. You start spending like you're an attending. Usually we see most residents are pretty good on this for the first 2, maybe 3 years. But then usually that last year it gets them. They start seeing some of their colleagues that were a little bit ahead of them in residency. They're attendings now. They got the cars and they got the houses and the private schools and the golf club memberships. And so the spending starts to creep up. So I would highly encourage you for sure, live like a resident as long as you're in residency. Like don't cheat that last year. But then also, and you guys have heard it, you can live like a resident for the first 1 to 3 years when you get out. It will make the world of difference. Okay, and I'll show you some numbers here that will kind of support that. Failing to understand how to coordinate your employer and your personal benefits. Okay, so we'll talk about that here as well. And then you fail to develop a strategy for your student loans. Okay, that's a big one, and we'll hit on that as well. So those are some of the pitfalls just to kind of give us context. Now, when we look at like how should we go about planning, okay, and I've shown this in I think virtually every presentation that I've done for the last 6 years. You have to think about financial planning as a process, not product driven. Okay. Now, do we need stocks? Yes. Do we need bonds? Yes. Do we need mutual funds or ETFs or whatever else, real estate, a business, all those things? Yes, those are the tools that help us accomplish things. But what we've got to figure out is where are you now? Where do you want to be? And then what is the process that we're going to do to get us there in the most effective manner? Okay. An analogy that I'll steal from Ben is, if you want to get from point A to point B, and let's just say a Toyota 4Runner will get you there safely and get you there in the time you want and in the manner you want. Do you really need to hop in a Ferrari and risk going 120 miles per hour knowing that you might wreck or you might get there? Okay. We want to make sure that we're charting that path, to get there without uncertainty. So the first thing that we look at is what we consider the foundation. Okay. Guys, this is a phrase I use all the time. It's the boring stuff. We don't particularly like talking about it. You don't particularly like talking about it. But those are going to be things like the insurances, the life, the disability, the home and auto, the professional liability insurance, the umbrella policy, the emergency fund, and those are all just defensive strategies. And we say defense wins ball games. If you look at how a lot of these great teams, dynasties, and it's fun to talk about Tom Brady and all that kind of stuff, but it was really the defense that shut down Patrick Mahomes. And so what we have to look at is, have we done a good job protecting the base of what we consider is going to be a very tall financial structure? Okay, because you guys have a ton of earning potential as physicians, so let's protect that. And then that way, as we build across and kind of move up that pyramid in the middle section, that's the fun stuff. That's where we can say, how are we effectively going to grow wealth through 401ks, 403bs, IRAs, real estate, cryptocurrency? I mean, whatever ultimately you're going to choose to do, that's where we're going to try to get those big returns. And then
what's cryptocurrency?
No one's heard of that, I'm sure. And then the last thing that we look at, we're not going to hit on it today, and that's where now that you've gained all this wealth over time and accumulated this, how do you pull it up for retirement, pass it on to the next generation, or give it away to charity, or a combination of those things? And so that process is going to be extremely important going forward. Okay. So let's hit on some of the boring stuff real quick. Okay. So let's first talk about disability insurances. And I'm going to click through and open all these up real quick. Okay. So the first thing that we look at is what we consider individual policies. Okay. This is a policy that you as a resident can go out and get. Okay. Now you can go to a lot of major carriers out there. We are very company agnostic. We really don't care who we use. We just want to make sure that we find the strong company that will be around to pay a claim, and that the definitions of the contract are in line, and that the price is right. So that's kind of what we're looking at as advisors. And so on an individual policy, you can customize this thing however you want. That's why we really like them. And the reason being is because you can make sure the definition meets your specific own occupation, especially if you go into like some specialty or subspecialty, we want to make sure that that definition is really on point. So, if you're doing some kind of invasive procedure and you can't do that anymore, because let's say you hurt your hands, but you could still be maybe, a family care doctor or, something else, or consulting or teaching, we want to make sure that you're getting compensation based upon what your specialty was, not just based upon your general overall occupation. It's portable. It can go with you from residency to fellowship, fellowship to attending and beyond. Like I said, customizable, but you do have to understand those premiums are going to be slightly higher. And the reason they're going to be higher is because guess what? You get what you pay for, okay? And you're locking in premiums now that you can keep with you forever, okay? And then the second type that we look at is a group policy. Now, group policies are awesome from a standpoint of they're usually free or very cheap. However, what we typically find is they have very poor definitions of disability. So for example, it might say, if you can't work, we'll pay you an income. But if you can do anything else, if you can go be a librarian or flip burgers or whatever, we're not going to pay out. You're going, wait a second, I got $300,000 of student loan debt. Like I need to have an income that can provide and pay back the student loan debt. Or they might say, yeah, it's own occupation. However, if you go work in another job, we're not going to pay out. So we want something that's going to pay you as your own occupation, but also allow you to do another occupation and kind of double up on that income. Okay. So just understand group policies are a great place to start, but a lot of times we need to build on top of that with some kind of like personal coverage, depending on your specialty, okay, depending on your situation. Ben, any questions on that or comments on that?
No, I've actually been typing away with a little bit of commentary on the chat box as Daniel's kind of talking. So if you see me looking away at the screen, that's what I'm doing. And so it's really important to get it when you're young, when you're a resident, because you get the discounts. It's limited underwriting oftentimes. And so maybe it's not year one residency, but certainly year 2 or 3 as you're approaching, and definitely before you graduate. And so it's again, it's not fun to talk about, but your biggest asset isn't your house, your car, the Ferrari that Daniel mentioned. It's you. It's your ability to earn a healthy income. And so Make sure to educate yourself throughout the process. All carriers are not made equal. You've got to understand the nuances, the definitions, and the details of the policy itself. And I'll be continuing to kind of provide commentary as Daniel talks.
Great. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And then from a life insurance standpoint, we're looking at really two types, term and permanent insurance. So let's talk about life insurance for a second. This is something that we see residents just get sold left and right. Okay. If you guys haven't been approached by someone in the insurance industry in medical school, just buckle up because they'll come out of the woodwork in residency. Okay. It's just par for the course. And what will happen is they'll sell you some kind of life insurance policy, and whether or not you need it, that's a whole different animal. Okay. If you've got someone that co-signed for debt, it'd be good to have some. If you've got a family or kids, it'd be good to have some. If you've got, a mortgage, Jeff will talk about that here in a second, it makes sense to have some. But, term insurance is very inexpensive. It would be a little bit more like renting, something that you're going to have for 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years. Whereas permanent insurance is exactly like what it sounds like. It's going to last forever. However, it's a whole heck of a lot more expensive. And the reason being is because there's cash value that generates inside the policy. So the age-old story that we hear is term better than permanent, or is permanent better than term? I can't sit here and tell you one's better than the other because they just serve totally different purposes. But I would recommend for virtually everyone on this call, term insurance is probably where you need to live in residency. I think that is the smartest move to kind of keep the cost low. And then lastly, you got your liability insurance, your home, your auto, your professional liability, your umbrella. And the home and auto stuff, I mean, that is something that I'm a big proponent of. Try to work with a broker on those things. Try to work with someone that can represent multiple carriers. If you go to residency and you decide, and Jeff will talk about that here in a second, but you decide that, hey, I think I do want to buy, guess what? We need homeowners insurance. We need, make sure your auto insurance is properly covered. Or if you're just renting, we need good renters insurance. Don't skimp on that stuff. We had a resident we're working with right now that when we got the tornadoes about a year ago in Nashville, his entire apartment, he was on the top floor, completely ripped off and all his contents pulled out by a tornado. Like, I'm not lying to you. They were holding on to like door frames and that kind of stuff. So, that stuff, it's never going to happen to you until it happens to you. Hopefully not a tornado, but a water leak or a fire or anything else. And then an umbrella policy, it's a very inexpensive way to get additional liability protection. So what an umbrella policy says is it says, if you were to, let's say you're working a late shift at the hospital and you were a little bit tired and you veered off and heavens forbid ran someone off the road, and they said, you know what, I'm going to Google Robert Frederick and I'm going to see that he's a physician, and I'm just going to assume he's loaded because all physicians are loaded. They don't know that you're a resident. Okay. And they're going to sue you for maybe $1 million. Well, let's say your auto insurance caps out at 500,000. You're going to be liable for the additional amount above that 500,000. They could garnish wages, access bank accounts, whatever the case may be. And so an umbrella policy provides an additional layer of liability protection above that. So you might get it in residency. I recommend at least in your third and fourth years, you should really be considering that. But sometimes you need to wait until maybe when you're attending and you actually own a home, if you don't own one in residency, because sometimes the insurance carriers want you to own a home and own a car to get the umbrella policy. Okay. And then professional.
Hey, Daniel, so quick commentary on umbrella. I mean, it's all about real stories. We have a client in Charlotte, an emergency physician in her mid-50s, and she actually hit somebody, a motorcyclist, and he ended up dying. And so thank God that we had the umbrella policy because the car coverage itself wasn't going to be enough. She's, again, well-established. She had a $5 million umbrella policy. And in this case, State Farm is taking care of a lot of litigation, a lot of the expenses, a lot of the back and forth because of that. And so the umbrella policy was an amazing investment just, again, to protect your assets.
Yeah. And to give you guys context too, like $1 million umbrella policy, depending on where you're at, is like usually 30 to 40 bucks. Like, it's not expensive. So it's a great thing to have. Next thing we're going to talk about, and there's a ton, we can really, it sounds silly, we can dive very deep into HSA accounts, and we're not going to do it today. But if you get an option to have a high deductible health plan at your residency and then can fund an HSA account, remember, just because you signed up for a high deductible health plan doesn't mean you automatically get an HSA account. You have to fund that. But we highly, highly, highly recommend it. And the reason being is because it's triple tax advantage. It's the most tax advantaged vehicle that we have on the market today. And what I mean by that is you can put up to $3,600 as a single person or $7,200 as a married person into an HSA every year. And every dollar you put in, you get a tax deduction on. So what that means is, let's say you put in $3,000 and you made $60,000 as a resident, you would only report $57,000 to the IRS. Then we can invest the funds just like you can in a 401k or 403b, and those funds grow without paying taxes on the growth. And then as long as we pull that money out in the future for qualified healthcare expenses, it's tax-free. So it wasn't taxed on the front end, it wasn't taxed as it grows, and it's not taxed on the back end. Super, super important. Okay. So again, if you have more questions about this when you get your benefits package, just reach out and we'll try to walk you guys through that. Now let's talk a little bit about housing. And I am not going to wax eloquent on this like I am a realtor or like I'm Jeff, a mortgage professional, because I'm not. But we do have a lot of housing discussions with residents. And so here's kind of how you mentally want to think about this. I see residents do both sides of it. I see residents rush into buying a house, okay, because they think that homeownership is the American dream. And then I see residents rent the entire time when honestly they probably should have bought a house. Okay. So why am I telling you both sides of that? The reason I'm saying is I don't know what's going to work for you. What really kind of depends on your situation is going to be what market are you in? Okay. Is it a market that you think is going to be appreciating or depreciating? We were talking about this before the call. You just can't find inventory right now. Housing's at an all-time high. Lumber costs are crazy. We're seeing people that are making $150,000 offers over ask price. And so it's just a really crazy place. So you might say, you know what, I'm going to sit on the sidelines for a little while. And I don't think there's any shame in renting for a while, especially if you're trying to figure out, am I going to be here long term or is this a good market? Those types of things. But the nice thing about being a physician is you've got access to stuff that other people don't. And that's a physician loan. And Jeff will hit on that. And what that can allow you to do is with very little or no money down, allow you to buy a property. Okay. Now, the thing you got to be careful with is if you're putting zero money down, you want to make sure that this is a place that's going to be appreciating, because if you buy a $500,000 house and you borrow $500,000 and the market goes down a little bit, you're not going to be happy, and neither is the bank. So we want to make sure that it's a place that you feel like is going to be a good market long term. We typically like for people to keep their housing costs, their monthly housing costs, that could be renting or a mortgage, below 30% of their take home pay. I prefer 25. But honestly, in some markets, it's just super tough to do. If you look at you're making $5,000 a month, and you're trying to keep that mortgage payment, around $1,000 or $1,200 a month, that's just very hard to do. So sometimes we're seeing people that are having to creep up higher, but it's just tough if you go above 25 or 30% of your take-home pay, because then there's not a lot of meat left on the bone when it comes to, eating out and buying groceries and doing all those other things. So you really just kind of have to balance your budget. Maybe you spend a little more in housing, knowing you're going to have to take away from some other things depending on the market that you're in. If you're in New York, it's going to be very expensive, versus if you're in Billings, Montana, it's going to be a lot less. Okay. Ben, any questions on housing? I know you're monitoring the chat thread, but I don't want to move too quickly because I know it's important.
No, I think it's different for every person. We have a lot of residents who buy because they know they're going to stay there long term, right? Because residency is temporary. It might be 3 years or 4 years. And if you say, no, this is a spot, this is where my family is, I want to be here for 10 plus years, then it might be a good time to buy. But if you're only going to be there for residency and you know it, then in my opinion, it's definitely, renting is the better option there.
And we see some physicians too that they say, you know what, let's use Nashville, for example. Nashville's in the heart of downtown Nashville. And they say, I'm going to spend a little bit more and I'm going to buy a house that's close to campus, knowing that even if I don't live here long term, there's always going to be an influx of the university, the medical school, the residency, all that kind of stuff. And so maybe that's a good opportunity. And Jeff will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think you can only get a resident loan as a primary residence. And so it's a great opportunity to buy a house with no money down, primary residence. And even if you move on to something else, maybe Jeff can clarify, but maybe if you move on to something else, you locked in that house, under a physician loan program, and then maybe you could move to something else. So there's some tricks of the trade there on maybe what you can and can't do.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt.
Not at all.
But you're correct. You can, in most cases, I know with us, it has to be your primary residence, and you can only have one physician loan at a time. So, but thinking about that, if you are, now is when you're going to have the least amount of cash to purchase a home, because as you go into attending and you go into practice, you're going to start getting more money. So you'll have the ability to put down on other homes. And, I, being in the Memphis area, in the Memphis market, I can tell you what I've seen from other residents. It's that, they're buying these houses and they're moving on to somewhere else, but they're keeping these houses and they're renting them out. Working with the university, working with other people to take advantage of that. So Daniel's exactly right. It's a great opportunity for that if you're in the right market.
You got it. You got it. Well, I think the cool thing about having a relationship with someone like Jeff is, Jeff's going to be able to guide you and say, hey, listen, you've got a physician loan, you can only have one. So we'll need to change your old house. If you want to do a new physician loan, we need to change your old house, refinance it to a conventional mortgage, and then maybe you get another physician loan. Or, I mean, there's so many ways that mortgage professionals can really help you finagle the numbers. So you don't have to figure that stuff out now. Just understand those relationships are important to have with the people like Jeff, or someone else, because they can really help you kind of, crunch those numbers and make sure that you're working whatever your long-term real estate plan is. So let's talk a little bit about cash management, because this can play a little bit into down payment as well. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples too. And guys, there's flexibility in these numbers. This is just, I wanted to kind of break things down so you get context. But we're using the example of a resident making $60,000 a year, okay, for round numbers. But most of you are making hopefully 62 to 64. That's kind of the number we typically see. But if you're making $5,000 a month of gross income, let's say you're saving maybe what, 4 to 6%, somewhere in that neighborhood in your 401k. Okay. And let's say you're doing pre-tax, just for this example. And then let's say some of your benefits maybe cost $300 a month. That means your pre-tax income, okay, is going to be $4,500 per month. And then let's assume we take out, I don't know, maybe, a little over 10%, maybe 12% in taxes. And then that gives you a take home pay of $4,000. And so let's say your fixed monthly expenses with groceries and rent and mortgage or whatever else you have comes out to $3,500 a month. So this was your perfect situation. Okay. In this world, we would love to see a resident. Okay. And this would take you some time to build up, that you wouldn't probably be able to do this, first year of residency, but we'd love for you to have about $4,000 in a checking account to cover the revolving expenses of $3,500 a month. And then ultimately we would like to see 3 to 6 months of your living expenses, which would be 10 to 20 grand ish, all rounded numbers, as an emergency fund. And that way, if and when the car breaks down, or even when you buy that house and the hot water heater goes out, trust me, you're not going to want to put that on a credit card and then start paying 20 or 25 or 29% in credit card interest. So the emergency fund is such a critical piece to really everything else. It's kind of the engine of your financial plan is that emergency fund. So you got to make sure you protect that. So what I would encourage you to do is try to sprint as much as you can, at least to that 3-month of emergency fund number. Even if you don't get above that in residency, but you have 3 months, you're going to be ahead of probably 70% of your peers. We've seen attending physicians come out and literally have $5,000 to their name. I mean, that's it. And 400,000 of student loan debt and a mortgage. And so we want to make sure that you're ahead of your peers, because you kind of have this information going into residency rather than getting it coming out of residency. Questions on cash management? Anything that's in the chat thread, Ben?
No, I think it's, you're making some great points. Just a couple of keys, Daniel, that I think is important for the audience to consider. You've delayed your gratification for so long, while your friends who are non-physicians, they've been saving money and buying things since they were 21 or 22. So we know it's hard. You've got 3 or 4 more years to go. You can do it, right? We've got a lot of confidence in you. That's number one. But number two, one of the things that you really don't think about is, don't try to keep up with Dr. Jones, because we promise you, Danny and I work with physicians all day, every single day, and Dr. Jones is broke. All right. Because more money just makes you more of what you already are. And so you've got to build your habits now in residency. Oftentimes this is your first job where you're getting a real paycheck. And so the habits, the savings, it starts today. And so this is great that Daniel's going over this, because what you are now will carry through to how you are as an attending.
You got it. You got it. Thanks. No, great context. Let's talk high level about student loans. Okay, guys. And I'm going to do high level because some questions might come up at the end on this, and I think we can get more specific. But you don't have to have your student loan situation figured out right now. And I would encourage you, don't stress at all if you don't have it figured out, because I bet if you figured it out now, it's going to change in a couple months. Okay. So right now, most federal loans, while you guys are in school, you're not, obviously paying on those, but most federal loans are not, even for attendings, are not accruing interest, until September. And so now once September hits, the gloves are off, will they extend it? I don't think so, but they could, and then it's a question of, do we go under budget and pay off a federal debt? Do we refinance that debt? Okay. And keep in mind, when your student loans are federal, you have a lot of government protections. Okay. So for example, people that have private debt right now are not having their interest deferred, okay, or delayed. They're still having to pay on it, but everyone that kept their debt federal is getting the benefits of not having any interest accruing. So they're either paying them off faster, or they're not paying anything and socking away cash right now. However, refinancing your debt to a private servicer in most cases is a much lower interest rate. So we're seeing federal debt anywhere from 5.5 to 7.5, whereas we're seeing private debt anywhere from, on the very, very low end right now, 3% all the way up to 4%. So you can just see the difference is pretty big. So you could also pay the minimum and focus on paying other stuff. Don't recommend that plan, but you could do that. Some employers offer assistance, not a ton, but we see it on occasion. And then the last one, which is where you'll probably sign up as a resident, is you'll probably go under one of these government, programs like income-driven plan. But you'll see pay as you earn, revised pay as you earn, income-based repayment. There's one or two others that aren't as popular, but the one that you're going to qualify for is going to be based upon your income. Most of you, would be my guess, will probably fall under pay as you earn. That's probably one of my favorite repayment plans. However, typically when you start making attending pay, they bump you out of pay as you earn and you start going into revised pay as you earn. And revised pay as you earn just doesn't have a cap on the amount of what your payment can be. And so that's why your payment could be a little bit higher as revised pay you earn, but you won't really have an option. And what these programs say as long as you pay whatever payment we tell you is the minimum required payment, as long as you pay that for 20 or 25 years, we will forgive your loans after that 20 to 25 year period. But under current law right now, it still sits that amount that they forgive in the future. So let's say you had 200,000 and it grew to 400,000 or 500,000 and they forgive it. The amount that is forgiven 20, 25 years from now will be counted to you as ordinary income tax. Okay. So picture this, you're making 300,000 as a physician and now you're making $500,000 to the US government because they forgave 500,000 of student loan debt. So you're going to show annual income that year of $800,000. Okay. Now what will the income tax be on 800,000? I don't know what it's going to be in 20, 25 years from now, but it's going to be a lot. You're probably looking at 35 to 45% in income taxes. And so if you go under one of those routes, you got to make sure you're setting money aside to pay the future taxes. The only caveat to that is PSLF, which is an overlay program over these government assistance programs. And what that says is if you make these minimum payments for 10 years, we'll forgive your student loans income tax free. But that one only qualifies if you go work for a local government, a state government, a federal government like the VA, or a nonprofit. Now, a lot of your residency programs are going to qualify as nonprofits, not all of them. So you need to check, but a lot of them will. And so like Vanderbilt here in Nashville, that qualifies. And so we get a lot of residents. So you got 4 years already socked away for that 10-year program. And so now you can go, hey, do I want to go take a job at a nonprofit or a government entity for the next 6 years to get these student loans wiped out income tax free? Or could I make so much more money at a private, practice somewhere or a for-profit hospital that I can just pay them off instead of doing student loan forgiveness. So these are all things that you just kind of have to weigh as you're going through, which direction do we want to go long term. Let's hold, because I know there might be some questions on that. Let's hold that and move on to a couple things, and then we'll wrap it up here and turn it over to the other people. Now, high level, okay, because I know most of you are not thinking about retirement accounts and that kind of stuff yet, but it is super important. The earlier you start, the better off you'll be. And so here's what I'm going to encourage you to look at. If we think about, just kind of a silly example of using kind of a farmer that plants seeds and time, with growth over time, when we look at if each one of the seeds is represented by a penny and each one of the ears of corn upper here is represented by $1, okay? What you're going to do, the IRS, the God in this illustration, if you will, is going to allow you. They're going to say, hey, Robert, would you rather pay taxes on money now, which would be the seed, and then get it tax-free in the future? Or would you rather pay taxes in the future and not have to worry about paying taxes now? Okay. And this is an age-old question that residents ask us every single day. And my answer to you would be, do you think you're going to make more money in the future than you are in residency? And hopefully 100% of you are doing this. Okay. If that's the case, you're probably going to want to lean a little bit heavier over here on paying taxes now and looking at using Roth IRAs or Roth 401ks or Roth 403bs. They all do the same thing. And so I would encourage you, look at your residency program, see if they offer a Roth 401k or 403b. And if they do, take as much advantage of it as you can, at least up to the match if they do match. So that means if you put in 4%, they'll match you 4%. If you put in 6%, they'll match you 6%, usually up to a certain level. And so that's the first place to start. And then from there, if you want to add more to your Roth accounts, great. Or if you want to open up your own Roth IRA, so be it. But I would highly encourage you to consider looking at those Roth accounts when you get to residency. Something else too, just to kind of be familiar, 401ks and 403bs, those are all going to be through your employer. An IRA is going to be an individual retirement account. That's something that you take out on your own. And then a brokerage account acts similar to an IRA and a 401k, except for you don't get the benefits of tax deferral or tax-free access in the future, okay? Brokerage accounts are very sexy and fun. People like to buy and sell and trade. You hear like Robinhood a lot of times, or some of these other popular platforms. And you can buy and sell stuff, and you don't have to worry about waiting until you're 59 and a half to access it like you do an IRA or a 401k, but you're going to pay taxes as you buy and sell. So you just need to kind of keep that in your back of your mind. IRAs and 401ks are going to be significantly more tax efficient. I would start with the Roth accounts first, and then if you want to go over to a brokerage account, maybe consider that, a little bit down the road. And one of the last things too is we get so many questions right now is, market's at an all-time high. Should I get in now or should I not? Don't overthink investing, okay? Investing is a long-term game, and it rewards the people that are disciplined and patient. And so the reason I'm showing you this chart is from 1979 to 2018, we took all these different segments of 1-year returns, 5-year returns, 10-year returns, 20-year returns. And so we took all the best segments from each one. The worst 1-year return was 2008, negative 37%. The best 1 year was 37%. Okay, so if you invested for only 1 year, you could go negative or positive 37%. If you invested over a 5-year period, you'd have negative 2.3 and positive 28. If you went for 10 years, negative 1.38, positive 19, and then positive 5.62 and positive 17.88. So why am I showing you this? The reason I'm showing you this is all of you are going to have a 20-year time horizon at least. Okay. And if you get in and you stay in and don't overthink your investments like your 401ks and brokerage accounts, you will win. And whether you win at 5% or you win at 17% in this example, who knows? Depends on your risk tolerance and your allocations and all those other things. But get in and stay in and invest for the long haul. Okay. And then one of the last slides before we wrap up and turn it over to other people. Why are we putting such emphasis on this? Well, if we took someone that is not a physician, and let's say they started saving at age 30 and wanted to retire at 65 with $200,000 a year of income, how much would they need to save every single month to achieve that goal? And this is assuming a 7% rate of return, okay? They would need to save about $3,000 a month. But now if we take a physician who went through medical school and residency, and they can't start saving, hypothetically until 35 years old, to have the same amount of income, they have to save $4,400 a month. But what if this person says, you know what, I'm going to live the lifestyle, start saving when I'm 40, that person has to save $6,600 a month. So the reason we're showing you this is you can a lot of times have the same outcome as someone else by putting a lot less in if you can just start earlier. So don't wait until you're done with residency. Take advantage of those programs now, and I don't think you'll regret it long term, okay? Any questions before I'm going to turn it over to, I think Jeff was next, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A at the very end after we have the resident speak.
Robert's had a couple questions, and I've been answering them over the chat box, Daniel. Two more things that I'm going to put on the chat box, you guys, is a couple of links that I think will be great resources. The first one is a book called The Myth of the Rich Doctor, right? A lot of people, the general population, thinks physicians are so rich. And so let's break some of those myths. And so read that book, jump on the website. The other link that I'm going to send you guys via the chat box is a great video series based on a lot of our physician clients and some advice that they want to give to you, right? There's a great video on some residents who are about to graduate talking about, man, had I done this or had I known that? And it's just 4 or 5 residents being real candid, real raw about their experience. So we'll love to share that with you. So check out the chat box for that. But make sure if you have any other questions, you let us know. We'll be here.
Yep.
All right, Jeff, you're up.
Looks like you're muted, Jeff. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna share my screen here if I can get in.
Let's see. Should be able to.
There we go. Okay, well, Daniel did a really good job about going over the buying the home versus renting. So I'm not going to go too much into this. It is a lot based on where you're going to be working. I mean, it's I'm based out of Memphis, so a resident here is going to have a better opportunity to probably find the home that's priced right for the money that they're making versus a Nashville, depending on the area that they're going to be working in. That's going to be a little more difficult. Or if you're in New York, it's gonna be difficult. Yeah. And a lot of part too is it, some people know when they go into residency a certain area that this is just where they want to stay. Maybe their family lives there. Maybe they just like where they're at and they know they're going to stay there. Well, you're going to be there long term. So that's living in a place long term should help. You should be able to determine whether you want to purchase or whether you want to rent. Length of your residency, whether it's a 4-year residency, whether you're going to stay there and go to fellowship, all of that needs to take place in your mind when you're looking to purchase or looking to rent. Quality of the house, quality of the house and the market in that area are all big keys as well. I'm going to touch base a little bit on what you would need to qualify if you did want to purchase a house. In our residency program, in our MD residency program, we look for signed, fully executed contract from the hospital or from the, where you're going to have your residency. You usually get that pretty soon after matching. So you've got that. You want to look at W-2s if they come into play. If you're coming out of medical school, going into residency in our program, that's the W-2 piece doesn't really matter because we look more of your residency contract. That's what we use to base your income off of. Online application, student loan, best option if you are going to buy would be an income-based repayment because that's going to give you the lowest payment as far as your debt to income goes. For spouses, co-borrowers, if you're married by chance or if you're buying a house with another individual, they'll want to look at their W-2s and their pay stubs or whatever they have as well. So how much can you afford? I picked just a $200,000 house and because it's in the Memphis market. And the resident salary is going to be based on what a resident would make here in Memphis. So if you're going, it's going to be different in other areas of the country depending on where you're going to be going. So with our loan, maximum DTI is 43%. So you can look at where, as far as amount of house you can afford, at that 43%, you could afford up to $1,992. I'm not recommending that any resident go out there and spend that kind of money for their first house. Daniel would agree with that, I'm assuming. So, but that's going to include your monthly payment, your city, county taxes, insurance, homeowners insurance, and on a $200,000 house, and I base it on a 5-1 ARM. If you are going to buy and you're not going to be in the area, interest rates right now are at all-time lows. So if you can see on our 100% MD loan on a 5-1 ARM, interest rate right now is 2.375. I mean, that's just dirt cheap, especially for a 100% loan. And also going back to part of your debt to income, they're going to look at that income-based student loan. They're going to look at credit cards. They're going to look at other loans that you may have that may take effect into that DTI. This has always been a fun quote that has kind of stuck around for the last 2 or 3 years, and Clint knows it's when you do apply, or if you are going to apply for a home, don't go out and buy the new car. Don't apply for credit cards. Don't do any of that because that's going to affect, what your score is. It'll just wreak havoc on your home purchase. And finally, most of your MD loans will be like this. This is the particulars of our MD loan at First Horizon, but one of the bars must be an MD, a DO, OMS, or DPM. It is 100% financing up to $1.2 million. So what does that mean? That means you don't have to put anything down. You would be only responsible for your closing costs on the home. And in some cases, you may be able to get the seller. I don't think it's going to happen in this kind of market because there's so many offers out there that, they're not asking, or they're not even offering to pay closing costs. But with that 100%, there's no PMI, no origination fees. We will allow you to purchase the home 90 days prior to your employment start date. So in most residencies, that's usually around July 1st. So you can start buying you can make purchases sometime in the early May time frame, which is now. So our repayment terms, 5/1, 7/1, 10/1 ARM, and a 15 or a 30-year fixed term. If you have any kind of questions, a little bit more on what those terms are, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to, go back and explain exactly what those terms are. 700 FICO score for the primary wage earner. Once I said earlier, it's first lien only, primary residence. We do require auto debit, and most other banks are going to require auto debit as well. And also we require that the payment come out of a First Horizon account, which I can pretty much guarantee you any other banks that offer physician loans are going to have the same. They're going to require you to pull it out of an account that's held at their bank as well. So with that, that's pretty much standard. It is, like Daniel said, the MD loan is a fantastic product from residency all the way into attending. It's probably one of the best loan products that's out there on the market today. So with that, any questions, I'm happy to answer, or if you put it in the chat, I'll answer those questions as well.
Thanks, Jeff. I want to make a couple of transition comments. First of all, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for our presenters, because one thing that I learned the hard way in my own world of financial management is the value of relationships. And it's really easy when you want to go get a loan or you want to do a retirement account to go and hit a website, a 1-800 number, and just, go find somebody. You might even find better rates on fees and things that way. But the value of having a personal relationship with the men and women in this industry that we trust is really, something that you need to consider as you're moving along in your career too. Having someone like this early in your career that can help guide you, all the way through the financial aspects of your life, so that you can focus on medicine, like that is such a big deal. And I think it's one of those things that I hear commonly from physicians is, wow, I wish I'd found the right person earlier in my career to just kind of help guide me along. So I thought I'd offer that. Before we take a Q&A, I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Tanner Cabbage, who's on the phone with us, on the Zoom with us tonight. He is a resident physician, and Dr. Cabbage, I want to say thanks for joining us tonight. He's going to be available to maybe help out with the Q&A portion of the evening if we have some more. So Dr. Cabbage, thanks for being here.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yep. So we'll take a minute. If there's any additional questions as far as the live Q&A is concerned, feel free to fire them out now.
Dr. Cat, it's all sunshine and roses in residency, right? Super easy.
That's exactly right.
Plenty of sleep.
Plenty of sleep.
Yeah. Too much sleep.
A little more for Dr. Cabbage. He's a pediatrics resident over in Chattanooga, and I got the privilege to rotate with him. And I just wanted to start off the Q&A by asking, what's one thing you're really glad you did as you transitioned from being a student to a resident, and what's one thing you kind of looking back wish you had done earlier?
Sure. So one thing I'm glad that I did, and this is, I want to preface this by saying it's extremely case dependent. I bought a house. And let me explain why I'm happy that I did that, because it is probably the toughest financial decision for a exiting fourth year med student, incoming resident to make. I've got a wife and a 2-year-old. We lived in a small apartment in Atlanta for 4 years in medical school. When we moved, my son was 1, so he was hitting that age where he was starting to, be able to move around, do stuff, enjoy stuff. I knew that I was going to be super busy for the next few years. I wanted to make sure that we were in a place that was safe, in a place where he could have everything he wanted, and we could have a good time when I was home, or whether he was with his mom or babysitter, etc. Renting an apartment would have been extremely difficult. Timing also was convenient because interest rates, as has already been mentioned, started falling, and I was fortunate enough to buy right before the housing market started picking up, and prices started going up. So right now it's certainly a unique time coming in because prices are a lot higher now than they were just a year ago. But interest rates are still pretty good. So that was for me. But depends on your situation. Sometimes that could be a very poor choice, or not the best plan, depending on your circumstance. To something that I wish I'd done differently. I was not careful about buying things to put into the house. So we had a bunch of furniture that was old, and we thought, oh, hey, it's nice. Now we've got a little bit of money. We need to be responsible. We're not going to go spend a ton, but we need to buy some new furniture, new couches, new table. And, you hear it about that furnishing a home is expensive, but you just don't really realize how true that is until you start doing it. And I had never had credit card debt in my life. And now we are just about to finally get everything paid for that we had bought coming into it. And all of it was just stuff we bought to furnish the house. And I wish that we hadn't done that, because that was money that we could have been putting into a Roth, or other things. So that's probably the biggest thing I wish I'd done differently, was just not be so, not jump the gun and go out and spend a bunch of money to furnish something.
I don't want to hijack this. Tanner, this is Daniel Burke. I don't know if you can see me on here.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how, and I've been in the same situation where, you buy stuff that you think you need, and then you then walk around the house and you look at it and you're like, this is just stuff. Like, whether it was a $800 couch or a $2,000 couch, like it's a couch, and so it's funny, the things you think you need, once you get them, sometimes you're like, maybe I didn't need it. I think it just comes with maturity sometimes, but that's a great perspective you just gave.
Yeah, no, incredibly true. And I'll just one quick example of that before I'll let the next question be asked. So we have a kitchen table, but then we bought a dining room table because we were all excited to host Christmas. My wife really wanted to have enough seating for both of our families. Well, then, of course, with the pandemic worsening, it didn't even happen. So we went out and bought this, $1,000 table that now has never been used and probably will only be used once or twice while we're here. That was a purchase that so easily could have waited a couple more years.
Yep, I've been there.
Don't worry, Dr. Cabbage, your 2-year-old will find a use for it with a bunch of markers and finger paint.
This is very true.
Other questions out there? Robert, do you have a stack, or are you?
I got some more, but I
would love just a question that's non-financial. You're married with a kid going into it. How are you managing, and how did you manage, your marital relationship and all that kind of stuff, as far as like, honey, I might be working, 60, 70, 80, 100 hour, weeks, depending on the rotation. Like how that dynamic?
Good question. And kind of the simple answer is that it is challenging, and for anybody out there that has a significant other, or even a family, it's something that I think it's really all about perspective going into it. You know, both of us knew it was going to be hard. We knew that it was going to be super busy, and because of that, I think it's been actually a little bit easier than we thought, because we didn't entirely know what to expect, and I think our what we envisioned it would be like was a little bit worse than it is. Um, One thing that's been a little challenging for us is my wife is a nurse, and so she's required to work, you know, X number of weekends a month, and so those weekends we often try to coordinate with when I happen to have a weekend off, so that way we don't have to have a babysitter. But then the result is we end up seeing each other very, very little during those months. So the biggest thing, the biggest piece of advice I would have for anybody out there like that is well, really two things. One is make the time. You know, today, for example, I finished up work at about 5:30, and still have I was in clinic today, and I've still probably got 5 or 6 patients charts that I've got to finish writing notes on. I could have stayed at work until about 7 and finished everything, but I knew if I did that, by the time I got home, I'd have almost no time to see my son because he's got to go to bed here in a few minutes. So I made the choice to come home and set everything from work aside, totally forget about it, and spend time with him, eat dinner as a family. And then once he goes to bed, once my wife goes to bed, I'll stay up for about another hour and finish those to make sure, you know, and it's not fun. I'd much rather be doing what I wanted or go to bed, go get an extra hour of sleep. But that time with them is really important. And if I, you know, without that, then not much of residency matters, right? Family's first, and you got to be happy. Got to have a good life at home for you to really enjoy residency and get the most out of it.
Very wise just to be in a PGY1 position. So that's that's an awesome perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone have questions specifically for Dr. Cabbage, so he can get out of here if he needs to?
I've got a couple of minutes.
Okay, good.
I'll just put in a shameless plug during the dead silence. You know, one thing that came through in Dr. Cabbage's comments is it's hard, right? It's stressful, whether it's money, whether it's family, whether it's having time to see friends, whatever that source of stress is. And Memphis Medical Society has essentially what, for lack of a better term, I would call a burnout hotline. So there's going to be a lot of, you know, mental and psychological health resources made available to you. The one thing we hang our hat on with ours is that it's confidential. There's only one person on the other end of that hotline. It connects you to a psychologist if that's something you feel like you need. Again, it's confidential. And the cost for that psychologist, I think up to now 6 appointments are covered by our foundation. So that's again, a non-financial resource, but a really good resource. And we make that available to residents in addition to practicing physicians. So, and you'll see some of those if you're not staying in Memphis and you're listening to this, those are popping up throughout the country through medical societies. So be on the lookout for it.
That's an awesome resource. And I'll kind of piggyback off of the stress piece of that and relation to financial, this financial discussion, and that would be that another suggestion I would really have for everybody, and again based on my own experiences, to really do what you can early on to prevent financial stress in residency. You're going to be busy enough with work, learning, if you have a family, the last thing you want to have to worry about is stressing about finances. You know, make a budget early on. You know exactly how much money you're going to be making every month. There's no guesswork based on how many hours you work. Put together a budget of what your fixed expenses are each month, and make sure you know that you can pay it all. And then set. I mean, if you've got credit cards, um, or all your bills, put it on auto pay so you don't even have to worry about it, and you know that it's going to be paid. You know that you're not going to overdraw, and then you can just periodically check in and make sure everything looks as it should. um, the last thing you want to have to do is worry about starting to get late fees, and because you forgot to pay off a credit card when it was due or anything like that. That's not the stress you want.
All right, any other questions out there? So I'll ask the presenters if y'all have anything you want to
Hey,
share.
Clint, I think we had a question coming in. Steven, what you got?
Yeah, we were recently told what our base income will be. I think for PGY ones for my program is about 54, almost to 55 a year. I think it's about 55 for the first year. And I was trying to make my monthly budget, but I need to find out like how much will actually be taken out in taxes. Like, does anyone have a resource for that regarding like, because I know Tennessee doesn't have state income. So are we just doing federal? If we could talk more about that.
I'm happy to.
Somebody
Yeah, kind of.
somebody may have a better answer than this, but there are some ways where you may be able to get pretty close, but whenever you get your first paycheck, you'll be able to see, and it should be the same every paycheck after that. So at the very latest, you should have that answer after your first paycheck, but somebody else may have an idea of how you can do that right now.
Correct. If you're at $54,000 a year, I would dare to say you're probably going to be somewhere around that 10% mark, somewhere in that neighborhood as far as taxes go. And you're correct; it's only going to be federal. You're not going to have any state. But Tanner's spot on. You know, come up with a budget now and hit it as best as you can, and then you just sure it up right when you get that first paycheck, because that's when you'll be able to tell, you know, exactly where it's at. But also understand tax rates change. And so, you know, you might get your first paycheck in 2022 and it might look identical or it might look slightly different, but probably within $5 to $20, you know, difference at $54,000, $55,000 income range. But yeah, that's what I would do.
So maybe plan for 10%, and then once we get the first paycheck, adjust there.
I think it's a good barometer. It might even be less than that, but I think 10% is a good barometer because things you're not going to factor into as well is when you do file your taxes, you know, in the following year when it comes April, you're going to, you know, have your standard deduction that's going to come off that. It's going to depend on how much you contribute to a 401k or 403b. It's going to depend on if you do an HSA. It's got like all these factors will go into that. So I think 10% is probably good at 55,000. You can always double check with a CPA. You know, they're a tax professional that will be able to really kind of pinpoint it, but I think it's probably a good guesstimate for right now.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of course.
I actually have another question. This wasn't really to Tanner, but Tanner, thank you for your input. Regarding the Roth IRA or 401k contribution, like if we're making around that, maybe fine, we'll go up maybe $2,000 a year, maybe $1,000 a year in income. What would you recommend regarding Roth IRA contribution? Like, do you think we should shoot for maybe $300, $400 a month? I know that's kind of a little bit too specific, but you know, what would you kind of go?
You know, the answer that's kind of, it depends on like how aggressive do you want to get? You know, if you're someone that says, listen, maybe I have, you know, no other debt, maybe other than student loans, and I'm renting and I've got, you know, $500 a month, which would max out a Roth IRA, you'll never regret doing that. Like never regret doing that. And the cool thing about Roth IRAs is the amount that you put in, you can always pull that out at any time without taxes or penalty. And so, for example, let's say you're funding $6,000 a year and you do that for 4 years, you're going to be sitting at $24,000. And let's say with growth, maybe that grew to 30,000. So you put in 24 and it's grown to 30. That 6,000 of growth from 24 to 30, you can't touch that until you're 59 and a half. But the 24,000 that you put in, if you got in an emergency or in a pinch, you could pull that out. We don't want to, but we could. So it can kind of act like another layer of emergency fund protection, just like everything else. So my answer to you is, as much as you can humanly do, I mean, you've got 30 years for every dollar you put into compound, you'll never regret it.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yep. So just try to fit it in the budget where you can, see where it falls. And I always recommend save first and spend last. If you say, I'm going to see how much I spend and what's left over, I'll save, you're going to be able to save like $3 a month. Like that's how much is going to be left over. So if you save it first, you'll adjust your spending to whatever your savings is.
And let me piggyback on that a little bit. We work with a lot of residents who are graduating. In fact, we spoke with a resident today, and he's 29 now, finishing EM residency down here in Atlanta, Georgia, at Emory University. And we calculated how much he needs to save as an attending, and that number is about 15% of his overall income. And so the earlier you can start as a resident in year one, the less you need to end up saving as an attending, right? Now, we've got some attendings who finish fellowship, and they're like in their mid-30s, right? They were chief resident, they're chief fellow, they're doing all these different things. And so now they're 34 or 35, they didn't save anything during residency or fellowship. And now that savings rate isn't 15%, it's closer to 22%, right? And so just remember kind of the discipline starts now. And so to get even more specific with you, yeah, I would love, if you're asking me, I would love for you to max fund that Roth IRA every single year. Of course, that's after you look at that 401k or 403b match, right? Like Daniel said earlier, you're always maxing that out and up to the match. And then after that, the Roth is always a great idea.
Yeah, if nothing else, I think something you can pick up from Tanner is habits. Like that's what you're building. Forget everything else with financial, but you're building habits in your marriage, habits in your personal life, habits in your finance, habits in your own, mental psyche. And so, if you have terrible habits in residency, you're going to carry those in as an attending. Money's just going to enhance the person that you already are. So don't think that you're going to be this awful person with finances, then become an attending making $300,000 a year, and all of a sudden you're going to be, Dave Ramsey of investments. It's not going to happen that way. Okay. So start building those habits today.
That is incredibly, incredibly true. And I would agree that the best thing you could do now would be to max out whatever you can in terms of your investments. If you're lucky enough to be somewhere that offers a match, max out that first. And then if you've got any sort of Roth, whether it's a Roth 403b, a Roth IRA, do what you can to put as much into that as possible. If it's specifically a Roth IRA, max it out to the full 55, or I don't recall what it is, but max it out.
Yeah, 6,000 a year, 500 a month.
So yeah, that's right. So 6,000 a year. Just because if you start budgeting that now, Daniel's right that then once you move on from here and you start having more expenses, you've already gotten in that habit.
Yeah, I had a doctor actually chat with me privately via the chat box, and they were asking me, "Hey, do I pay down my debt or do I save for retirement?" And that's a really, really good question. And the answer is, well, even in residency, you can do both. But just know this: you'll never make up for that lost time in those residency years where you're not saving for retirement. And ultimately, it's our favorite moment when these residents graduate in June and they get their first paycheck in August, because like, oh my gosh, this is so much money. And so you're going to be able to save money for retirement and to pay down your debt in a reasonable amount of time. And here's what Daniel and I know, and a lot of you guys are starting to realize: money is more than just numbers, facts, and figures. Money is very, very emotional. All right. And so it's hard to take that emotion aside, but when you just rely upon the facts and the figures, you've just got to start now. And that student debt, instead of paying it down in 5 or 7 years, maybe you pay it down in 12 or 15, and that's going to be okay, because that'll allow you some more flexibility, some more opportunities, some more things to buy a house or go on vacation with your family. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Freedom. Grant Cardone.
That's freedom. That's what it's about.
Very controversial figure, but I watch some of his YouTube, but he always says that.
He's great on Instagram.
Tanner had to hop off, but he was putting the little guy down, is what he said. So kind of just showing that pattern of behavior. So I think that was great contributions from him. Does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up? I don't want to take everyone's time. I think this was great. This recording will be even better because Daniel talks a mile a minute and it's all great. And I'm trying to listen and I'm trying to like absorb it all, but then I'm going to go back and watch it later. So it's perfect.
Guilty.
But
So
it's all gold.
when I talk, you can watch it on the 2x speed, but when Daniel talks, you've somehow got to do the opposite of that. I'm going to wrap this up the way we always wrap it up. This Money in Medicine initiative is a really special thing. It's unique to Memphis Medical Society. It's unique to our community. And one of the great things that I've always loved about it is we build this on feedback, and that, like, everybody says that, right? But we have actually done that. We're not, looking at some textbook somewhere and saying, here's the next chapter or anything like that. So if you heard something tonight that you want more details about, please let us know that. Share that with Robert, share it with us. And we're glad to build future content based on that, because we're willing to get as specific as we need to, depending on the topic. And we hit on some of those things tonight that we could probably talk about for another hour, frankly, but always happy to help. I know these financial professionals are always happy to help. They all put their names and email addresses in the chat box. We'll follow up with everyone as well. See another budgeting apps question in the chat box. We could take a second to answer that. Daniel throwing in Mint and YNAB. Those are actually two that I've used as well. And I would start there. Some are free, and YNAB I think has a small cost to it, but I use YNAB. I have used Mint. I think it's a preference. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks,
we'll
guys.
send the recording out soon. Everybody have a great night.
All
And
right.
good luck.
Thank
Congratulating
you.
everyone.
Take care. Congrats.
Take care.
Good night.